And this is the part of the show where we take a look at the week that was in news, current affairs, and all things interesting in and around the world. And last week, of course, we saw DA Federal Council Chairperson Helen Zille. She was in hot water yet again for posting a cartoon by Jeremy Now, which was viewed by many racial stereotyping and generalization. Now, to discuss this and other stories, I'm joined by social and political analyst Tessa Dooms. Tessa, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
2020 seems to have started on a bang, literally. Before we delve perhaps into Donald Trump and his escapades, let's take a look at what's been happening back home. Helen Zille, how social media or the lack of that awareness seems to be causing a stir. So, the DA has not had it easy. I mean, since her return, Herman Mashaba leaving, Musi Maimane leaving, you'd think that she would somewhat shy away from controversy, but this has not been the case.
Yeah, no, I think the fact that we're still having to talk about Helen Zille in the political space is not a great start to the year. I think her ability to read social media is only one part of the problem. There's a much bigger issue with Helen Zille, and that's her ability to read politics in the political landscape. I think she still thinks about racism, and she thinks about issues related to racism, political sloganeering and as part of the political machinery, as opposed to the structural issues that they are and the structural inequalities that they're based on. And that's the weakness that she has, is that her inability to see those things for what they are as kind of deeply structural and deeply also interpersonal things for people. They're not just something that happens in the political realm. When you're the person who's facing the effects of land dispossession, when you're the person facing the effects of racism, it's not just cute and social media and something that you can put in a cartoon. Yeah, I mean, the caption, and I want to get this right, she says it aptly captures the fallacy and racism behind race generalization. So obviously in her context or her structure of interpretation, she's found means to justify herself. I mean, is there room to liken these two? You cannot even go there. Yeah, so I mean, it was deeply problematic. History around the sexualization of black men and the ways in which their sexualization has been weaponized as part of a colonial project as well. So there's so many problems in that story, but the failure to recognize that it's not just about generalizations. Yes. That it's about a pattern in a society that we've built that makes sure that people have unequal access to justice, unequal access to the means to run their lives. And the inability to see that, the inability to see it as something that would be stirring to people and that would resonate with people in a bad way shows that she is not a good politician. She's a politician that thinks about politics in this very abstract way, as opposed to a way that came out and said that they'd done an audit about her tweets and that there'd been 600,000 out of the 1.4 million followers that are bots and obviously a ploy from the EFF, etc., etc. I mean, is that even a factor to consider in the lack of sensitization towards what messaging she's putting out there? I mean, that was one of the strangest things I've seen, the bot wars between the EFF and the DA. Number one, we don't care. we genuinely don't. No one cares. Nobody was thinking, I wonder if she has bots or not. What we care about is the political content and the kinds of things that she is somebody who has a voice in society, who has a following in society, especially a following that is predominantly white and middle class. She has a role to play in terms of the voice that she puts out there and what kind of circumstances that voice comes out in. And I think she's failing in that, and she's hiding behind, oh, it's just Twitter, oh, it's just social media, oh, look at the bots, and not taking responsibility for the voice she has in society. Does it perhaps also reflect the unity or lack of unity within the party? Because I remember, or if I'm wrong, correct me, but the DA did issue, after that colonialism tweet, that there would be some structural policies in place for its leaders and the representation. I mean, when things like this happen, what message does this reflect about the party at large? I mean, it wasn't actually only the colonialism tweet. About a year before that, Mbalin Tuli had been reprimanded for liking a tweet that somebody thought was too inflammatory.
Yeah.
So the DA has got social media policies. The problem is that they don't seem to apply to Helen Zille in the same way they apply to everybody else. So Helen Zille gets to kind of, tweet with, very big intentions, and other members of the party like tweets. We've seen it even with Colin Barnett. She also got wrapped over the knuckles for liking stuff. So I think that the rules don't get applied the same in the party when it comes to the social media policies they have.
Well, on that note, let's take a look at the cartoon that she posted. According to Helen Zille, again, the post aptly captures the fallacy and racism behind race generalizations. What are your thoughts on this? Interact with us at Newsroom 405 using the hashtag WeekendDawn on 405. Now, Tessa, another story that I think has got the world shaken at the start of 2020. Of course, it's the conflict, or the imminent conflict, between the United States of America, Donald Trump, and Iran. I mean, what is happening there?
So it's not an imminent conflict, it's now an ongoing conflict, because there's been an active strike from the USA that has killed a top Iranian general, what people would consider to be the kind of number two man in the country and number one man in the military.
Yeah.
And so this strike is being effectively called an assassination by the Iranians and thought of as a provocation for war. It's not just being seen as something that's light or on the side, or something that's, just going to pass away. They're saying that they're going to take active steps to have a revenge and to retaliate, and that does not spell anything good for the rest of the world.
Elections are coming up in the United States, so I don't know if there's a trend, but presidents who go to war, is there a likelihood that they get re-elected at this rate? Or, how does this play out during the American elections?
I think that Donald Trump's re-election is not a far-fetched thing, whether or not this Iranian thing had happened. I think that he stands a very good chance as an incumbent of being re-elected.
Okay.
What this does for him, on the one hand, is it kind of distracts from the impeachment stuff, because there's something much bigger than the impeachment that's going on now.
Yeah.
If they do go to war, they've now had to put out many more troops into the Middle East, and they stand the likelihood, and they've said this was an act not to create war, but to avoid the deaths of Americans. Iran has been very clear that this military general is not a terrorist group on the side somewhere. And so whatever he was planning, if indeed he was planning to attack Americans, that plan can still continue. And I think that the calculation here of what the cost was of doing this, the Americans have been keeping an eye on this particular general for a long, long time. If they thought it was a good idea to take him out, I think they would have done it before. And so it would be interesting to know what was so severe that Donald Trump thought it was worth the risk.
Yeah.
But more importantly, what are the plans put in place to ensure that whatever it is that he was planning to do within the Iranian government is not still going to continue to happen, and that these now new talks of threat and revenge aren't going to escalate things, especially within the region, the Middle East region itself. Because it's not very likely that you're going to have a strike on American soil.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that's very difficult about this situation, is that Americans can talk bravado because they very much feel insulated from wars that they are participating in.
Yeah.
And I think they need to think back to the 9/11 time where they were caught off guard. They also need to think about the fact that this particular government has tried to do attacks on American soil. So it may not be as safe as they think it is.
I'm just looking at, we know that war actually brings a lot of money in for countries because of the weapons, etc., that sort of gets used during the war. But who then stands to benefit from this conflict in the Middle East, particularly in Iran, at large?
Right now, that's incredibly unclear.
Okay.
So there are a couple of theories around why the U.S. would want to destabilize Iran now again.
Yeah.
They've always wanted regime change, and they've wanted a much more democratic, as they would call it, a much more democratic Iran, and that the Iranian government is an oppressive one. That's kind of the formal line. But there are talks about the fact that Iran has just struck oil again in a new part of the country. There's also the question about Iraq and finding a new power in that area, a new superpower in the Middle East. So Iran, Saudi Arabia, I think the U.S. is hoping that they will emerge as the new superpowers, because those are countries that they can have much better relations with. And then, of course, there's Israel, and Israel and their connection to the U.S., but also the fact that they've lost a lot of their support in the region when it comes to other governments. So there are a couple of potential winners if Iran, is caught up in a war with America, but there are actually more potential losers, because if this does escalate, the fallout of war is economic instability in the world. And I think that's the big thing that we all need to be worried about, is whether or not wars end up on our shores or in our lands, the kind of economic ripples that it can have across the world if it does escalate, and if other allies do need to get involved, and if this goes beyond the Middle East region. That's really where some of the dangers lie for the rest of us.
So, world leaders at this point are obviously on their toes right now. So, sort of what is happening behind the doors as we speak? What are they negotiating at this point? I can imagine it's behind closed doors and they're literally discussing the affairs of the world.
Yeah, well, so America, its European allies would really be knocking on its door asking, hey, what's the plan here? One of the things about this that's remarkable is the extent to which Donald Trump actually bypassed Congress and his own domestic infrastructure in making these decisions. It said that some of the security cluster also said that this was not a good idea. So I think his European allies would be knocking on the door asking exactly what is the plan here, and they would be making decisions amongst themselves. The UN will be making decisions amongst themselves about what needs to happen. What's more interesting is what's happening in Iran. The Iranian parliament has called a special sitting on Sunday to sit down and discuss what this means for the region, what this means for their country. And we know that they're in 3 days of mourning. But once that 3 days of mourning is over, you can expect that the Iranian military operations are going to start getting themselves up together. And the USA have said they're open to talks with Iran. So I think they're going to be approaching Iran, wanting to have talks. But I think the time for talks for the Iranian government may actually be over.
Yeah, past. Tessa Dooms, thank you for joining us. Let's leave it there for now. Of course, social and political commentator Tessa Dooms joining us in studio and just chatting to us about some of the top stories that have been taking place this week.